Good morning, everybody. It's early Thursday morning. It's kind of like midday for my guest and I, Griff Sturgeon, who's an early riser like I am. I think he's an early riser by force of his dog ownership. I'm just an early riser because I'm a sick human being that cannot sleep well. But I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger. This is episode 214 of Hawk Blogger Mornings, and there's only one person that I wanted to talk to once this trade news came down, and it was the oracle of Seahawks linebacker Twitter, the man, the myth, C Mike's spin move, Griff Sturgeon. How are you doing this morning, Griff?
Doing quite all right. You might have heard my dogs as well there, and just a few seconds ago that they are doing well also. Yeah, I'm doing good. This hope you're doing well as well. This news was it was fun yesterday, seeing that buzz across everyone's screen.
Well, I mean, I honestly I went to try to pull out some of your tweets related to Jordan Brooks and related to linebackers, and there were so many. I felt like we wouldn't get to talk if I just went through some of your tweets. But look, I mean, it had to feel a little bit vindicating after some frustration with the way the Seahawks handled this news and the amount of crap that I'm sure you took from people that were like, you don't know what you're talking about, trust John, blah, blah, blah. And then to see them make this move, we win some, we lose some. But right. On this one, it feels like a pretty clear win for you and Maddie.
Well, you like you said, you lose a lot, right? So
yeah.
It's yeah. So I definitely could share in that sentiment. But yeah, it felt like something needed to be done at linebacker. I don't think that their plan A was necessarily Dodson and Baker, but I think they were okay with that. I think, they were 1-year deals, right? It's see what's there. If it doesn't work out, move on. They weren't anointing these guys, but I think they were committed to the possibility of them working out. And obviously it didn't with Baker. And of those two guys, I liked Baker more. Like I said that a lot. And he clearly was outplayed by Terrell Dodson to this point. And for Dodson, it's been a little complicated, but I still think there's a path of finding a role for him that makes sense for him and the Hawks for this year. And I don't know what will happen afterward. But yeah, there was that there were rumors swirling the first week of free agency that they called about Devin Lloyd in particular. And so that's kind of there's always the fan thing of oh, I hope they could just trade for whoever, right? Like we like to, fictionalize our favorite, realities with that sort of thing. But this was kind of rooted in there's something here. And it just felt like, it's not a good linebacker draft next year. Only 1-year deals. There's the supposed rumor that they called the Jaguars for a linebacker, a young linebacker. So that was in the back of my mind. They probably are going to be working those phones until they can't anymore. And sure enough, we learned with Leonard Williams last year, that was in the works as early as August, and it finally everything lined up right until the trade deadline, right? So of all the names I could think of, for whatever reason, Ernest Jones wasn't on my radar because I was thinking of just other guys and contracts. He was just been traded.
He was just traded.
Right? The Titans defense was good. So if I'm Leonard Wilson, I'm pretty ticked off right now if I'm the DC for the Titans, because I just lost one of my best players for a 4th-round pick. So that's kind of rough, superficially, but they've got a different roster window at the moment that they have to, take into consideration. But yeah, so it was kind of all right, I know I'm crazy, but I'm not totally crazy when the trade went through. So it was definitely okay, they are identifying the linebacker spot as an issue, and this is them being aggressive and trying to fix it. And it could be I know I come across it. I can come across as a used car salesman when it comes to my favorite linebackers, but I don't want to anoint this guy too early. But he could be transformative in certain ways. He could be not just an addition, but a multiplier. So it's a cool move they made. I really like it.
Well, I certainly want to follow up on that evaluation and why you think that's the case. I want to rewind a little bit though, because I mean, you're a humble guy, and I've always given you credit on this show and off the show about how how well I think you handle all the crap that comes your way on Twitter, and you've got your perspective and you stick with it, and you have your way of sharing it.
I invite it too, though.
Yeah, you do.
That's
But
on
like
me.
you've really talked about Jordan Brooks, and how much you liked him for a long time, and also that PFF grades never showed how good he was, and then he signs with the Dolphins for a pretty reasonable deal, and lower cap hit this year than at least than Jerome Baker was on a 1 year
Mhm.
deal, and then the Seahawks end up going out and not only signing two free agents, but then trading one of those and having to spend a fourth round pick to acquire another linebacker to basically admit that they did not address the linebacker position in the right way this offseason. So, I'm curious,
Mhm.
what do you think, what do you think, they maybe believed was going to be possible, and what did you think maybe was the flaw in their approach heading into this season?
Well, we'll never, starting with Brooks, we'll never know what the dynamics were really as to why he's no longer a Seahawk. It could be like maybe they just didn't like him as much as me and five other film guys on Twitter like him, right? Maybe they did like him and they were concerned about the medicals. Maybe
Mm,
he didn't want to be here, right? So for me, like Brooks not being a Seahawk, I don't necessarily shake my fist at John Schneider per se, so much as regardless of why he's not a Seahawk, especially at that contract, which I would have been pretty happy with the contract he got in Miami. It's just an unfortunate reality that he isn't, regardless of why, especially with it wasn't a great linebacker draft, and
mm,
linebacker free agency last year was kind of weird to me. So, but maybe they wanted to keep him, and there was that day one snafu, so much going on in free agency this past offseason on day one. Schneider kind of alluded to like, yeah, we wanted him, but we had that negotiations with Leonard Williams. Who knows if that's true, if that's just him saving face or being polite to Brooks and his agent, who
mm,
knows, right?
mm,
But I do think though that there's commentary and only going after 1 year deals with new guys that they knew that like, okay, a linebacker might be a problem this year. And this offseason, we're taking care of D-line and corner. And then we can worry about linebacker next offseason or maybe again during the season. So I think they kind of knew what they were signing themselves up for, like the spectrum of outcomes. And like it might have been a slightly inefficient road into acquiring a decent linebacker again in Jones, but they still got there. It's not like
mm.
this was year two when they finally figured it out. Because how many years have they had a weakness at a position and them not being able to solve it? I mean, this when it comes to linebacker, you're really talking about two spots, and they might have they might be 75% of the way there.
Mm-hmm.
Via Dodson probably might be being better at will, and Jones might being a Pro Bowl caliber esque guy at the middle spot.
Before we close the books on Jerome Baker, this is a guy that had made a number of plays, had shown up as a blitzer, has shown some coverage talents in past years, and by all accounts, just didn't seem like had some injury issues and didn't really show up the way you'd want. What was your evaluation of Jerome Baker this year? And I want to come back to as well.
Hold
I
on one
I
second.
made a
I'm
comment.
gonna let my dogs out. Sorry to cut you off because they're making too much noise.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, it's funny. We'll come back to this, but one of the things that I said yesterday, and I'll share this again with Griff, is when this news broke, I mentioned to Ray Roberts yesterday when I spoke to Jerome Baker, I just got a vibe that maybe he wasn't super thrilled with where he was. It could have been a million different things that were making Jerome Baker maybe not super thrilled to be where he was, but that was the impression I got, and I usually trust my gut on how I'm reading people. Ray made the great point yesterday that how players talk to a reporter is different than how they're talking to a player. So don't necessarily assume you're getting the full view of him. But Griff, you also I think you and Maddie may mention maybe that you'd heard that he wasn't happy here. Is that
Well,
accurate?
That was me. I like to use the term industry source as just me being, stupid on Twitter. That was just me chatting with Maddie, but it was something we had talked about before. And it definitely, connecting those indicators of what we think we're seeing on the field and what we're all seeing on the field with what you might have experienced in person interacting with him. He didn't seem like a malcontent per se. He just, like, the effort level wasn't there. And I don't like to throw out the term like low effort for like professional athletes, but it didn't seem like he just didn't seem enthusiastic about being a Seahawk. He had, coming on the heels of an injury, not really being able to practice much. He was making assignment errors that are like basic day one type errors, like, not, am I a B gap player or am I an A gap player? Wait, am I a curl and cover two or am I a flat and court? Like, not knowing what the call is. And when there's enough of that through, I think how many games did he play? 3 or 4?
Mm-hmm.
But when it's happening in every game and you're approaching the midpoint way of the season, and then the effort level isn't really there on top of it, combining that with, the things that you notice in person, like, he probably is just not gung-ho about the whole, career change up here, and it's just not working. Like, I wanted him to work out because I think he's got traits that work for the scheme, but it's just not, it's not coming to fruition. So it was probably time to either bench him, and if you can't bench him, or other than bench him, move on in some way. So
let's talk now about Ernest Jones and what he brings to the table that maybe the Seahawks haven't had from their core up until now. I mean, this is a guy in Ernest Jones that was who Aaron Donald handed over the defense to in Los Angeles and caught Mike McDonald's attention in the Super Bowl. And, Bobby Wagner's had nice things to say about him when he was down there. Yet he's been traded twice in a year. So let's try to keep it, real. Like, why has this guy been traded twice? And why do you think that he could be a kind of force multiplier of a player?
Yeah, the whole whatever went down between him and the Rams and trading him to the Titans, that was weird, right? Like, even like we all saw that clip of McVay when he was asked about it. He was very guarded and like got almost angry at the question. And is that indicative of like he didn't like the move? Who knows? Rams roster building philosophy. I mean, I don't know, but my perception of him as a Ram, anytime I thought of Ernest Jones, anytime he popped into my mind through watching a Seahawks Rams game or stuff that gets posted on the internet, or, watching a Rams game that isn't a Seahawks game, anytime Jones says anything, I'm like, oh yeah, good player. Yeah. A good solid linebacker. Like, that was my, preconceived notion. Right. So I always had like a positive association with him. So for a guy like that to get traded, coupled with, your Donald quote there, like, he's the guy, it's weird, right? And then he's on the Titans defense, and the Titans have a good defense. Mm-hmm. Obviously they're in shambles overall as a team because of their offense and everything. But to trade away, not just like you're trading away the middle linebacker, like not the weak side line, like the guy who handles all the calls and stuff in the middle of the season, when he's, as I think the tape showed, playing well, and the defense is humming. It's like, it's odd for a 4th round pick. Like what all is going on there, right? So yeah, I don't have an explanation for that other than it might just be circumstantial thing following circumstantial thing, and maybe there isn't something deeper going on there. It could just be randomness, Like, I really don't have an answer for that, but it's weird. Like, I agree. Like, I don't really know what to make of it there. But as an actual player, I think there's something to be said for, like, Mike McDonald had comments on him specifically, like he's always been watching him and stuff. There's commentary and like, this is a guy that Mike likes for real. That's established. This isn't a draft pick where he sees a vision for him moving forward. This is him grading an existing player in the league and say, yeah, he's a ball player. And also, as we know, plays in the same scheme already. So it can't be more of a clean fit in that sense. Mm-hmm. And to anoint him like, yo, you're the Mike too. Like, because he's played Mike and Will in his career, saying, you're going to stay at Mike. I like you at Mike. And arguably the most important position in his defense is the middle linebacker spot. If not the most, one of the 3 most important. So it's like that part of it is really exciting. So like we don't need to infer what we think Mike thinks. We know Mike loves this guy, right? And then as an actual player, um, I mean, I think just like I went back and watched the Jets game. I watched the Bills game and the Packers game, and then I'd watched the Bears game week 1 just to see what was going on with Caleb Williams, and he just didn't like stand out, but it was like, oh yeah, there's Earnest doing his thing. He's a really good player, and he fits the scheme really squarely in my eyes, and can be like a huge boost for them on defense.
What's his calling card?
So really, the way he's good, he's not great at any one thing, but he is firmly good at just about everything. Like he's a very balanced player. He doesn't possess like in my view, like the premium tier 1 skills. Like you wouldn't task him with carrying, say, a 4-4, even a 4-5 running wide receiver 40 yards downfield, which occasionally linebackers will find themselves doing. But you can stick him on a tight end and have him run anywhere with him and say zone match. So like the Brian Urlacher, low-footed Tupu running down the pole of Tampa 2, right? That middle hole carrying seams. He can do that if it's a tight end. But like in coverage, his zone drops are really heady. Like he's really smart. He knows what's going on. He knows where the dig routes are. And that's something where like if you just isolate Seattle's statistics right now, defending anything like a yard in between the numbers from one side to the next at say 10 to 20 yards in the middle of the field, they're like bottom 5 right now. Well, the Titans are top 10. And part of that is you got Ernest Jones dropping to the field hash. So if the ball pre-snap is on like the center's holding the ball on one of the seams, on one of the hashes, field, the Mike usually, depending what the coverage is usually the Mike. He's got to jet out and run kind of a diagonal angle in his drop while keeping eyes on the quarterback if it's his zone coverage, looking for those in-breaking routes coming from the field side toward the short side, toward the boundary side. And whether or not those routes get completed is simply a function of, does the linebacker gain 10 yards when he should? Does he gain 12 when he should? Does he melt back an extra yard right when he should, et cetera, et cetera? And whether or not you do that is the difference between the quarterback either throwing an interception or checking the ball down. And if you have a good pass rush, then everyone can just come downhill and kill it for 3 yards instead of 8 or 10 or whatever. So he gives you that repeatedly. It's very consistent. And like I personally like really appreciate. I'm like, okay, watch that Bills game. The Bills love to run dagger and in different combinations of it, where you get an inside seam and then a digger up behind it. They ran that like 3 or 4 times, and he either forced a tough throw or he forced a check down on all 4 of them. So like at that stuff, he's quite good at against the run. So, they fit the run from too high, right? Like we watched the Seahawks doing, we've seen some issues with it. And I've really been struggling watching the Seahawks with it, because it's like, it's trying to draw the lines blur between what is a talent issue and what is the scheme. Because even if you have talent, some of these runs are kind of yielding stuff on paper, and you kind of need hero plays to clean it up. So sometimes you just can be like, okay, it's a scheme. But watching Jones in the scheme, it's a lot of it's like, oh, that's what that's supposed to look like. Oh, okay. He knows how to. So he's really good in awkward positions and making bad looks not be as bad, like damage mitigation and stuff. When he's got a blocker on him and he's responsible for 2 gaps, he's really good at playing that cat and mouse game with the running back, not making the read super defined for him. We've seen Dodson and Baker overplay their initial gap when they have 2 gaps and then falling back late. He's really good at tricking the running back into choosing the wrong gap and then popping out laterally. That's the other thing. So his combine, he did not test well on the agility stuff, but functionally on the field, he can move laterally quite well. You see it show up the lack of agility in more like extreme athletic situations where he's got to run 5 yards to his left, flip on a dime, and run as fast as he can. Like that can get him at times, but like that's why he's simply good instead of great, right? And it's okay to just be like good, but the fact that he's good in almost every single category, his value is in that is in that range of play, right? So it kind of multiplies together. So also he's really good with contact. I mean, he's so, if a guard gets on him, he gets off the block eventually. You know, he might give a yard or two of ground, but he gets off that block eventually and becomes available for the ball. So I imagine Mike watches his tape and is just like, yeah, he checks off so many boxes, the boring stuff, the hard stuff. So really, really, really exciting player on that front.
Yeah, I love your comment about his cat and mouse with the running back. When I was watching his different highlights of him yesterday, that's one of the things that stood out. He is so much more patient, is the word that kind of came up in my mind. Of there's two gaps to cover, and he waits for the running back to commit before he commits to his gap.
Mhm.
And that is so the opposite of what we've been seeing this year for the Seahawks backers, where they just, especially Tyrell, who's I think trying to do right, but is just over eager and is jumping into a gap and leaving one wide open for somebody else. So that seems welcome. What do you think this will do for Tyrell Dodson moving to weak to the will backer?
Yeah, well, the weak side linebacker in a two high scheme, even though they've been playing more one high for run reasons, but they might play now more two high with the addition of Jones because they can defend the run in it better theoretically. So the will in a two high scheme, my view of that is like if your weak side linebacker is good enough to also play Mike, then you can simply scheme the will accordingly and intensify his range of assignments and responsibilities so that you're not wasting all that he can do. If he can't, no biggie. You simply just tweak your scheme a little bit and only put on his shoulders what he's capable of. Whereas with Mike, you can't really do that, the middle linebacker position. If you can't get certain things out of your Mike, then your scheme's going to suffer. But at will, you can kind of hide guys a little bit. So that means then, but also because of the nature, they're both inside linebacker positions. For the most part, anything you're good at Mike also applies at will. So like Dodson to me is a very, very good, even downhill player, whether run or pass. Like anything that's in front of him, he's very comfortable closing space. He can identify it quickly. Sometimes he can bite on stuff and things will go on behind him. But generally, if the picture's clear and he can just go and especially come downhill, his functional range is there. He can play through contact quite well. I mean, we remember the Broncos game. He was flying downhill, right? And the pass rush was forcing the ball out. Everything was in front of him. He killed stuff, right? So you can still get that from him at will. It's just when it's time to find that those in-breaking routes or drop under a seam and get good like top down, as McDonald calls it, vice coverage on a route and zone, or he's got to roll over with a crossing route. Yeah, he'll still need to do some of that stuff. He'll just need to do it less frequently. So everything that Dodson can give you, all of his ball production is still there at will. It's just you're asking him to do less important stuff. And then also the other side of this is because you can shrink the responsibilities of will, this kind of gives him the opportunity to get better at the harder stuff without it really affecting the defense more. And this is what we saw with Patrick Queen over the course of a few years, because McDonald also coached him his rookie year at Mike. So imagine it's too high in the middle zone is that middle hook. You have to worry about stuff coming from both sides of the field, right? At will, you really only have to worry about one side. It's like 75 one side, 25% the other. So Dodson can just kind of rep stuff that is easier, and he can shrink his world of responsibilities. If he can get good at that, then maybe you can expand his role long term, and maybe long term means over the course of this season. So I think it's a good thing for Dodson. He's going to keep getting snaps. His issue in Buffalo, part of it was that he couldn't get consistent snaps. And then when he did get consistent snaps, he was arguably playing out of position because he had to play some middle linebacker. Like 1 week he's the Mike, 1 week he's the Will, 1 week he's the Sam. You know what I mean? So the Will allows him to play downhill more, opportunity to blitz him more. And it also just kind of puts guardrails up for him with the harder stuff. So.
We're talking to Griff Sturgeon of the Seattle Overload podcast. Make sure you check him out. He and Maddie Brown over there. So in the last few minutes we've got with you, Griff, a couple questions. So Tyrese Knight, I think there's now this seems like a clearish decision. Let's assume that John Schneider didn't trade a 4th round pick without intention to re-sign Ernest Jones. Let's just assume that for now and that they'll bring him back. Then, do you think that Tyrese Knight profiles as a Will more than a Mike, or vice versa? Do you think that Tyrell Dodson has a chance to earn a new contract with the Seahawks if he plays well at Will, or is it just pretty clear that they'd move on to Tyrese Knight?
I think they'll probably let that question answer itself and just let things play out. I mean, if Dodson turns it up a notch and you want it for continuity's sake, then maybe take a peek at re-signing him. I don't think it's trending that way in this moment, but it doesn't mean trends that line, that curve can't bend a different way.
Mm-hmm.
As I've said, like I was not high on Knight pre-draft. I wasn't super high on him in preseason, although I do think he was more viable than I mistakenly thought he was. And McDonald's talked about how like this is going to be a 2-3 year long process. So um, if I had to guess, they probably want Knight to inherit the weak side spot next season. So I mean, if you told me to like bet, I would probably think the starting linebackers this time next year would be Jones and Tyrese Knight. But we'll see how it plays out. Tyrell Dodson's story isn't finished yet. So
Yeah, and it's remarkable that Knight and Jones are both under 25 and
yeah.
could be your linebackers for a while if they both work out. Where do you see this defense in general, Griff? Obviously, it's been struggling at times. They now have added Roy Robertson Harris. They've gotten a little healthier. We haven't
Hmm.
really been able to see the full crew since really week one.
Yeah.
When they
Right.
were all your best players on the field. Do you think this defense has a capability of making market improvement over the rest of the year?
I do. I do. There's that idea of when you add a player, they don't always add. Sometimes they can multiply to what's around them positively and negatively. Like, those people talk about greater than the sum of your parts. That means your parts are multiplying instead of adding, right? When you look at the Seahawks defense, if you unbucket it statistically, it's a very clear picture of what they are. Um, and you can just look at it on a down to down basis. On first down, they're a bad defense. On second and short to medium, they're a bad defense. Second and medium to long, they're a top 10 defense. Third downs, they're an elite defense. And like if you just presented that data to anyone, what you would think is, okay, passing situations, they have elite pass defense talent. That would probably mean their corners and their D line is really good. So like that's great. And like you should, if you had to choose, you should be better at the pass than the run, right? Because the pass is more important. So, but then if you're bad on early downs with what's going on there, I would think, okay, they're not defending the run well, and you see more play action on early downs and earlier like shorter down and distance situations. So they're probably struggling in those areas. So through Jones, theoretically, if you can improve against the run, you can also improve against play action. One, you're improving those numbers, right? But then also that allows you to access more second and longs on second down, allows you to access more your average distance on third downs being greater as well. So by airdropping him in, you not only do you improve a weakness superficially, but you also improve your strengths. There's like this multiplying, like domino rolling effect with him. It's kind of a like when we saw the addition of Roquan Smith in 2022, like we talked about. It's like when the wolves got reintroduced to Yellowstone, there was this
Yeah.
cascade effect. I think that's a
Uh,
real thing in sports, like all these
yeah.
systems interacting with one another. It's like, is Roquan Smith the difference between being a bottom five defense and a top five defense? You would think like, well, he's really good, but surely he can't make a unit elite all by himself. And he's not making elite all by himself. But what he does is he allows you to unlock other elements of your team that you otherwise can't access. It's like you have to be good at this first, and then you can be access to things you're already really good at. So in theory, Ernest Jones like is the key to a room that has all the tools you already need. You just can't open that door to that room right now. This could be really big. And like I don't want to anoint things. I don't want to get ahead of myself, right? I think we don't as a fan base, but like right now in the aggregate, I think all the efficiency metrics, they're like a bang average defense. And that's
Hmm.
because they're so lopsided, good here, bad there, and it averages out to average. he might allow you to be on the right side of the top 10, at least to the second half of the season window. I think that's within their grasp. So
that's great to hear. That's great to hear from you, especially, and you're always very neutral in your evaluation. So I always appreciate hearing from you on that. All right. Anything else before I know you got to run here? Anything else you wanted to say? Closing thoughts? Any parts of the Seahawks or otherwise?
Man, I don't know what to think of this team moving forward. I'm just gonna like let each game just play out the way that it will. I'm kind of done projecting at this point. Now that we got Ernest Jones, it's like just all right, whatever happens, happens, and we'll assess as we go. But I'm definitely excited for this next like 4 or 5 game run here. So
yeah, it's gonna be fun, Griff. I was actually thinking I'm gonna reach out to you and Rob and Jeff. I think we need to redo our NFC West mock draft here in a little while. Now that we're partway through the season.
And you took Jones too. So
I did take Jones, and it's not just for that reason, but I was that made me think about it, and I'm like, we now know a lot more, and I made some picks I would never have made now, and the NFC West looks so different.
Yeah.
7 games in than it did before the season. So, sure. Griff, what do you guys coming up at Seattle Overload?
Tonight we'll be doing a live tape breakdown of the Falcons game. We're gonna focus primarily on the first half run defense, why it was so rough, and then what adjustments they did or maybe didn't make in the second half to be so much better in the second half against the run. So
awesome. Well, make sure you follow Griff at C Mikes. There's 2 S's. C Mikes Spin Move on Twitter, and check out he and Maddie Brown on Seattle Overload. Great stuff. Griff, thanks for joining us this morning.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. All right. That was Griff Sturgeon. See Mike Spin Move. Make sure you check him out. I have Paul Kuharsky, I should say. Used to work for the Tennessean, used to work for ESPN, covered the Titans, still does for many years. He's covered them since 1996. He'll be coming up at the 8 o'clock hour, and I wanted to talk to him about why the Titans made this move and what his evaluation was. So looking forward to having him come on. Before we do that, I figured we got time for one of, I think, everybody's favorite segments and everybody's favorite song. It's time for some voicemails.
Time to rise and shine, it's clear. HB Mornings voicemails here. Play and laugh, let go of fear. Start your day with cheer, my dear.
All right, today's voicemail comes from who is this one coming from? I should know this already. This comes from Troy Fagan. This voicemail. So hold on, I'll get this one queued up. I should have had it already queued up, but I didn't. So you guys will be patient with me as I get it there. Where'd it go? Okay, I thought I had the right screen, but I didn't. All right, here we go. So this one comes from Troy Fagan. You guys should be able to hear this now.
Hello, Brian. This is Troy. Thanks for taking these voice messages. I've heard you and now Jeff Simmons talk about this year's Niners team being like the 2015 Seahawks team. I think the 2015 Seahawks came off losing the Super Bowl, and that's about all the similarities those teams have to me. That 2015 Seahawks team, as bad as it started, still ended up being the league's number 1 scoring defense at the end of the year. And we all know how elite second half of 2015 Russell Wilson and Thomas Rawls offense was. We were the DVOA champs. So if I'm going to compare the Niners to a Seahawks team, I would go 2017. All the names are still there. They're all old. They're all getting hurt. And the team's just not really that good. So that's what I see.
Awesome. Well, that was Troy, and good comment there. I'll make sure to bring this up with Jeff as well. So I'll respond in a second. First, I love chat. Everybody just cannot stand the voicemail jingle, which makes me so happy. Yes, someone asked if it's AI music. It is absolutely AI music. It makes me laugh, and I am the amount of country music I have in my library is really what you just heard. That's it. I have no country music. So there's a lot of things I like about that. And one of them is it makes everybody cringe whenever I play that jingle. So that's not going anywhere. Get used to it. But as far as Troy's going, I think you raised some good points. You know, that 2015 Seahawks team ended up being, number one ranked defense again for what was the fourth straight year. That was the last year they did that. And this is not a 49ers team that's going to end up probably ranked number one in either offense or defense. And I don't necessarily see them having the same level of resurgence, but people might forget about that 2015 team was partway through, the Seahawks were really struggling. Cam Chancellor and the leaders had a players only meeting, and everything kind of turned from there, and they played like lights out the rest of the way. So that's I think a key difference. This 49ers team absolutely has the talent to still potentially be strong the rest of the year. It's just probably not going to recover quite as much as that Seahawks team did. So yeah, appreciate that. Appreciate the thoughts. I do think that Jeff's comparison, a lot of the things are similar to 2015, so I don't think it's totally out of pocket. But and I think some of the things we talked about as well, of that starting to be the transition of more of a team built around Russell than built around the defense is also relevant to the 49ers and what's going on there, I think, with Brock Purdy versus what was a very defense-oriented team. If you would like to leave a voicemail for me or anyone on the show, you're welcome to do that. Just open your phone, record a voice memo, and then attach that to an email. Send it to me at brian@hawkblogger.com. And if nothing else, you'll be forcing people to listen to that jingle, which makes me smile every time. Love to hear from you. It doesn't have to be about football. It doesn't have to be about the Seahawks. Can be a joke, can be life story, can be anything you want to offer. It just has to get through my screen once I hear it that I think it's appropriate to play. So we'll wait here for the next few minutes. We'll get Paul on. A couple things that I'll bring up while we're waiting is, I think I unfortunately missed Abe Lucas in the locker room yesterday. It sounds like Bob Condata and Greg Bell at least got to speak with him and did not get any clarity from what I've seen about what the injury was. So I don't think that has been clarified yet. Did hear that he kind of bristled at this notion that he was ever supposed to be back in August. He doesn't know where that came from. He didn't think that was ever going to be the case. And then he also said that he agreed and thought that it was a realistic time frame for him to be back after the bye week for the 49ers game. So, more information about what's going on with Abe. And I think him getting out there, he's also said he'll have to see how things feel after practice. And so we'll see. Hopefully we see him continue to practice, that he doesn't have to, bow out or take a day off. That would be a bad sign. If he's able to continue to sustain practice day after day. He was wearing pads yesterday, he's back in. So I think they're going to be patient with him, but the reality is now we're officially on Abe Lucas watch. This is a guy who, when I saw him his rookie year, I thought that guy had Pro Bowl talent. I thought that guy looked like a better tackle prospect than Charles Cross. Now, that might be crazy. People might strongly disagree, but that guy was dishing out pancakes like he was IHOP. I mean, he was out there really physically dominating a lot of players as a rookie, which you just don't see. And And I think getting him back for the run game as much as for pass protection could be huge for this team. And even if you just watch him walk out, the video I played yesterday of him walking out on the field, he's a strong dude. He is a different kind of player at that right tackle position. And we also got to see that George Fant, there's a chance he might play this weekend, according to Mike Macdonald. So I think really, really great to see that the right tackle position's kind of coming into form. I don't know if you saw it as well, but it was a pretty cool little video. It was funny, of Mike Jarrell getting Nickelodeon slimed by his offensive line teammates. And that was so, like, you hear his laugh and you hear the way they're playing with him, and he's already like beloved in that position group, among his position group, among the coaches. I think Mike Jarrell is just not just a great story, but a great guy, easy to cheer for. And if he gets another start this weekend, it'd be, cheering like crazy that hopefully that he continues to play well at that position. I tweeted out, I made the point before his start that being a rookie tackle is not easy, even if you have the highest pedigree. And no joke, if you look at the tackles that have lower pass blocking grades than Mike Jarrell after that first season, it is a long list of first round, second round, third round guys. Mike Jarrell's a 6th round pick, and you're talking about Olu Fashanu, you're talking about Talisi Fuaga, you're talking about Amarius Mims, Tyler Guyton. Those are all first round picks that have lower pass blocking grades on the season than Mike Jarrell has after one game. Blake Fisher, Kingsley Suamataia, hopefully I got that close to right. Second round picks, he's above them. Brandon Coleman and Caden Wallace are third round picks. He is above both of them. So even though his PFF grade was not like thrilling, I just wanted to put in context that a lot of rookie tackles PFF grades are not thrilling. So that's part of what happens, getting kind of accustomed and acquainted to the league. But I thought it was a really solid first start for him. I think we'll have to see how he does after he faces some better competition. And Rousseau, as well as Epinesa from the Bills, represent a real step up in terms of the competition level that he'll be facing. They bring different levels of power, different levels of speed, different counter moves. I think that there could be some really rough reps for Mike Jarrell this weekend, and I think everyone should hopefully give him a little bit of grace and realize that he's going to get in a trial by fire. There's a reason, 6th round rookies are not getting a lot of starts in the NFL. Got a super chat here from Adam Walsh. Put this up here. Quick shout out to you, Brian. Always great content, and I look forward to all your pods daily. Best podcast on Hawks anywhere. That is incredibly kind of you to say, Adam. There's a lot of people creating a lot of great content. So, I appreciate you saying that. And I'm happy that we've got good stuff to talk about, quite honestly. And as much as John Schneider gets a lot of shade, and I've been super critical of some of his decisions and his approaches, especially offensive line, I'm super appreciative that he has kept to his word since the moment he got to Seattle, which was he is going to constantly look for ways to improve the team. Now, the process might be questionable sometimes. The amount of draft capital that they give up in trades, I think, is questionable. And when you see a situation like this Ernest Jones trade, where the Titans acquired him for what was essentially a 5th round pick traded for a 6th round pick, so even less than technically a 5th round pick, and you then trade a 4th round pick plus a player, that merits some, like, at least a sideward glance of why are the Hawks having to pay more than other teams. But let's just set the cost aside for a second, which, by the way, I think is an appropriate cost for Ernest Jones. But let's set the cost aside. This is a guy who hired Mike Macdonald, who saw that the players that they brought in were not working out. he could have left Mike Macdonald out in the cold and said basically like, hey, I gave you these guys. You're a linebackers coach as well as a defensive coach. Figure it out. But he didn't. He's partnered. He's in the foxhole with Mike Macdonald. They are looking at the same tape. They're having, conversations about where there's flaws with this team. And he went out and made a deal that it's really hard to come up with a reason why the Seahawks won't be better after this trade. Doesn't mean that they're going to be the best or the Super Bowl contenders or anything, but Ernest Jones at Mike is just probably any evaluation seems like a clear upgrade at that position, at a position where there was some problems, and a way to also make Tyrell Dodson better, and a way to make the run defense better, which then has an impact on letting your pass rush eat a little bit more, letting your team have a chance to create more turnover-worthy plays, lets your offense not necessarily, play from behind all the time. Maybe you get fewer sustained drives by the opponents, which means that your defense is fresher and can do more. There's so many cascading potential changes. And he didn't just do the Ernest Jones trade. He also did the Roy Robertson Harris trade. I cannot find a single problem with the Roy Robertson Harris trade. This is a guy who I think might be with you for the next couple of years at his cap number. And he's a real stud in there. I had no familiarity with his game before the trade. When I watched this tape, you guys watched that with me, I think. And I was so impressed by how stout he was and how much he just doesn't get moved. And when I talked to the guys today, or yesterday, I should say, about it in the locker room, I talked to Byron Murphy. By the way, that interview's up there on patreon.com/hawkblogger. So it was a fun interview. You should check it out. I mentioned it to Draymond Jones in the press conference yesterday. And, he's just talked about how much of an advantage it can be to have long arms. Roy Robertson Harris looks like he's got 35-inch arms. They're just over 33, and they're not the longest arms, but he looks like at 6'5", he just looks like he's got the. I talked to him about his straight arm, which is kind of his bread and butter, and he's trying to work on counters, but. I mean, you saw it in the Falcons game where he just was standing up Jake Matthews. We saw it on the Big Rage Rewind yesterday. So I think him for a 6th-round pick, such a huge get. And I think we've talked about the cascading impact that can have. So I just am appreciative that John Schneider is making moves to improve the team. I'm appreciative that Mike Macdonald is not so stubborn as to say, no, I'll figure it out. Let me just coach these guys. And now we get to kind of figure out what these guys can offer. So I want to welcome to the show Paul Kuharsky, who has covered the Titans since 1996. He has worked at the Tennessean. He's worked at ESPN. Has tons of great stuff over at paulkuharsky.com. That is Kuharsky. And Paul still covers the Titans. Paul, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well. A bit of a surprise and a welcome surprise that we get a chance to talk today. I'm curious, with this news about Ernest Jones, did it catch you off guard?
I thought Ernest Jones would have been one of the guys that was probably on the market for them. And these things don't necessarily go in order in terms of the guys they most want to trade, necessarily going first. And I think they got a great return here. I mean, they traded, they swapped 2026 5th and 6th round picks to get him from the Rams, and now the return they're getting for him is pretty good. They like Jerome Baker, who I'll ask you about in a minute.
Sure.
During free agency, and they had him in Tennessee, and I think they were surprised he left the building. And so I think they would have preferred him to Kenneth Murray, who they ultimately signed from the Chargers. And so to wind up with a guy that they liked in free agency, adding a draft pick when they're in a fire sale mode, as much as they liked Ernest Jones, I think they come out in pretty good shape here. Ernest Jones was terrific, though, here. Came in, the Rams were really down on him. I think, maybe over his desire for a long-term contract, and he had a balky knee, or they told him to sit out because of the knee. It was complicated. But he got here, hit the ground running, played very well for them, and was an outspoken leader. So we hardly knew him, but he made a good impression. I think you're getting a good player up there.
Well, good to hear that. And it's one of the wildest kinds of trade situations I've seen where the Titans trade a 5th round pick. They end up getting for that a 4th round pick from Seattle, a 6th round pick from the Rams
next year,
and Jerome Baker. So is that right? Did I have that right?
Yeah, you have that right. And Rand Carthon is rightfully getting a lot of praise for that, but it shouldn't overshadow the fact that the Titans are in position to be dumping Ernest Jones, as good a trade as that is, in position to be dumping DeAndre Hopkins after an offseason where they spent something like a total of $290 million to bring in a bunch of free agents that looked very shiny. For a team that had expectations that they wouldn't be in position to be dumping anybody. They might be in position to be adding somebody at the trade deadline as a cherry on top for a team they thought was going to surprise everybody after they brought in Calvin Ridley and L'Jarius Sneed and Lloyd Cushenberry and Ernest Jones and Chidobe Awuzie and Tony Pollard. And this team's been a disaster.
When you, one of the things I kind of wonder about is I'd actually identified the Titans as a team that might be a trade partner for the Seahawks at the linebacker spot, but I thought it was because of their depth. I thought you mentioned the Kenneth Murray signing. They draft Cedric Gray. Jack Gibbons has been I think a reasonably good player for them. Otis Reese was a guy that kind of showed up a little bit late last year. They drafted James Williams as well. I thought the Seahawks might go after one of like Otis Reese or someone like that. Do you think that part of the reason the Titans made this move is they like some of their young depth?
I mean, I envision Baker being the starter here as soon as he's up to snuff. James Williams, a very intriguing late pick, super athletic safety guy moving in, but I don't think he has a handle on things yet. More developmental. Cedric Gray was a 4th round pick. Didn't show up in training camp before he got hurt. So I think he needs some time. Otis Reese is more of a special teams guy, kind of a wild guy, not super dependable. Jack Gibbons is a guy that needed to be replaced. He's a very smart guy who's in the right place all the time and knows where the right place to be is, but can't necessarily get there on time because he's got some physical limitation.
Interesting. So we're talking to Paul Kuharsky, who's covered the Titans since 1996 for Tennessean for ESPN and others. Paul, so tell us a little bit more, like when you hear about a player like Ernest Jones getting traded twice in less than a year, you kind of like it's a little bit of a red flag and you wonder, like, is this a guy that people don't want in the locker room? Is there a reason teams don't want him on their team? What can you tell us about him as a person and as a leader in the locker room?
I think he's a little disgruntled in LA. I mean, certainly things came apart. They basically told him they weren't going to sign him long term, so he was a lame duck, and I think for both sides they wanted to get him out of there. So I don't think it was a pretty ending in Los Angeles. Here, I think he was terrific. Came in, knew he wasn't getting a long-term deal and wanted to earn it. Took on a leadership role quickly. Played both sides of the inside linebacker position well in terms of stopping the run and getting in coverage when he wasn't in mismatches, and was really outspoken. Look, the Titans have the #1 rated defense in the league, but they've given up a lot of key plays at key moments for a team that's, on a razor's edge with not much of an offense. And he came out and said it. And I don't think this is why he was traded at all, but he said, us being the number one defense doesn't mean much because we play good defense when it doesn't matter. And at the big moments when it does matter, we don't play big defense. I just wrote a story about Titans leadership today. And in parting ways with DeAndre Hopkins and Ernest Jones on the same day, a team that lacked leadership lost two very good leaders. So I think he'll come there and play hard, learn quickly, and look to earn himself a contract. And I know a lot of Titans fans, I don't know if it's realistic or not, but would hope that the Titans would be a bidder on his services in free agency next year, and love the idea of having gained that stuff in the trade and get his services back in free agency if his price is manageable.
That would be quite the story. And I think if I was a Titans fan, I might hope for that as well. You mentioned that Ernest Jones is played well against the run, against the pass. What stood out to you about him on the field? What did he do exceptionally well, or what did he do very well?
Well, I think he was just present. He's around the ball a lot, and I think he had good closing speed to get to ball carriers coming forward. In particular, any linebacker, against the wrong tight end and a wrong running back is going to be in trouble if he ends up against a wide receiver, certainly. But the Titans haven't been they've had at least one weak link at inside linebacker for some time. He and Kenneth Murray as a tandem have been as good as it's been for some time. In the Mike Vrabel era, they weren't big on investing in the position. They had a good stretch where they went from Avery Williamson to all the way up to David Long, who wound up in Miami, where they drafted mid-range guys. They finally missed on Monty Rice, who was a third rounder, and that kind of threw them off kilter. But they had done a good job of drafting there. Hopefully Cedric Gray gets them back on course with that. But if he doesn't, Murray and Jones, or now Murray and Baker, hopefully get things done. I've heard that Baker maybe wasn't a super effort guy up there. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's interesting. I know you had some questions about Jerome. Obviously didn't get a lot of chance to get to know Jerome Baker, not just because he was here for a short period of time, but because he was injured. He missed all of OTAs, all of training camp. Missed a couple of games during the season. So as you know, we can't talk to injured players in the press. So it really got very little chance to interact with him. When I did, I personally got the impression that he was not super thrilled. It could have just been not thrilled to be having that conversation for all I know. But, it's a very big contrast to someone like Tyrell Dodson, who, is definitely standing up, having conversations, taking accountability for when things aren't going well. I know that during the Giants game for the Seahawks, there was Leonard Williams mentioned after the game that there was some bickering on the sideline in between, players and finger pointing, and the linebackers have been a issue. That's something Mike McDonald has called out. He said the defensive line is doing their job. The edge is getting set, but it's second level where we're having some problems. And that was, 1 or 2 games into what was a really bad stretch of run defense. And so, and then you watch the film a little bit, and Jerome Baker, who knows, it could have been injury. It's always hard you never want to assume it's an effort issue with a professional player, but he might just not have loved it here. Not everybody's a Northwest kind of person, especially as it gets here into the darker and colder part of the year. So who knows? But hopefully, he's been a really talented player in the past for the Dolphins. Injury was an issue for him in Miami, and so it's possible, from what I understand, that's a big part of why Miami moved on from him. So I think if he's on the field, and maybe he's in a scenario that is better suited to him, he still seems like a talented guy.
Well, I think certainly for the pick they're getting back, a change from Ernest Jones to Jerome Baker, who I said they liked in the free agent period, probably not a bad thing for the Titans who are going nowhere. So we'll see.
Well, Paul, anything else? Actually, I'm a couple of quick things if you don't mind.
Sure.
Tavondre Sweat was a guy that I loved in the draft, even though he had all this off-field stuff. How are folks feeling about Tavondre Sweat so far as a rookie?
You know, he's super against the run, but he's not getting the push in the pass game. And this is a bad pass rush team that's only got really one edge guy. They were counting on Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons in combination to push the pocket. That's not happening. So in that regard, 38th pick in the draft needs to be more than a run stuffer. So I wouldn't write that element of his game off yet. He's a real cheery guy, fun guy. Yeah, one of those guys that you need in the locker room for sure. And I think he's really intent on being a very good football player. We just haven't seen that element of his game emerge yet.
Do you think the Titans are done making deals? Are there other guys you have your eye on to see if they will move them as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think they should move everybody they can. Now, they have a replacement for Jones in that deal, and DeAndre Hopkins still a good player, but hasn't been productive this year. He and Will Levis had a better connection last year than they've had this year, so that's concerning. But they have Nick Westbrook-Akine, who just keeps kind of rising. They finally got him down to like the 4th or 5th wide receiver spot this year, which seems like where he belongs. But then when they have no spark on offense, some of us started saying, well, Nick needs some targets. And they've targeted him 4 times and he's got 2 touchdowns. So he'll take up the bulk of Hopkins snaps and can be a productive guy. Some of these other guys that you think they should maybe trade, who would yield better returns, Jeffrey Simmons, perhaps Harold and the word is that they're not going to deal Jeffrey Simmons, Harold Landry, who's their only good edge rusher. They have nobody behind them, so they would just be putting bodies out there. But those guys could draw, conditional thirds or second round picks, I would think, which are obviously of much more value. And they dealt away their 3rd round pick yet again for L'Jarius Sneed, who's not performing up to expectations at all.
How's things going with Quandre Diggs down there?
He's been solid. I think he's taken a step towards getting better. That's another guy I think that they would deal if there was a suitor, if somebody was feeling not so good about their safeties or had an injury. And I feel bad for guys that came on 1-year contracts kind of expecting things to be better. I mean, the business is the business and you never know exactly what you're getting into. But he's a good talker and a good leader, as you know. But the defense is effective yardage wise, but it gives up plays at big moments. They played well against the Jets, and then Aaron Rodgers drove the Jets down for a game-winning drive at the end, which was just enough. They lost to Malik Willis, a backup quarterback that 2 regimes here didn't like, that they managed to get a 7th for from Green Bay. They lost to Joe Flacco. So you're playing good defense and you're losing to in situations like that. It doesn't quite compute. The offense obviously not scoring enough points for him.
All right, last thing, Jamal Adams. I know he's no longer with the Titans, and I don't think he's gotten any feelers that I've seen from anyone else. What was your impression of Jamal Adams while he was there, and do you think he's going to find any suitors?
I doubt it. I just don't know that there's a position for him. I mean, it was very nichey what they planned to do for him here with the big nickel, and then kind of the matchups that they were going to use him for didn't seem to emerge. He had a persistent hip problem. Couldn't really get an answer as to whether the hip was an after effect of the knee or if it was independent of that. And he just didn't play. I mean, he's a fun guy to talk to and very direct and cool and informative. He was very helpful to me when I did a big piece on Denard Wilson, the defensive coordinator here, who he had experience with in the past. But it just didn't work out. Titans took a flyer, hardly spent any money. I hardly got anything out of him. And I think ultimately he went to them and said, hey, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I'd like to get out. They reached some kind of settlement, and good luck to him. But I don't see anybody jumping at what he brings, which is very niche-y and very injury risky.
Paul, where can people find you, and what do you have coming up that people might want to read or watch?
I'm at Paul Kuharsky NFL on Twitter, which I still call it. And my website is paulkuharsky.com. All things Titans all the time. Podcasting this afternoon at what time? 1 o'clock Central Time. Appreciate people jumping on, checking it out. We'll talk about some of these matchups coming up this weekend against a very tough Detroit Lions team.
Oh, we could tell you from firsthand experience that is a class team they've got there. So good luck with that. Paul, thank you so much for joining. Nice to meet you, and hope you have a great rest of the season.
Thanks for having me. Talk down the road.
All right, sounds good. That was Paul Kuharsky. You can find him at paulkuharsky.com. Giving us some insights into Ernest Jones, into the Titans, and what's going on with why this move was made, and the fact of the matter. I think one of the most telling parts of that is a lot of Titans fans, and Paul was not, he was not declining this as an option, are hoping that the Titans will bid for Ernest Jones when he becomes a free agent. That they're hoping that they not only got a 4th-round pick in Jerome Baker for Ernest Jones, but that once he is available as a free agent after this season, that he'll be back with the Titans. So that's good news. That's good news. I mean, this is a guy that the fans liked. You heard from Paul, good leader, good in the locker room, played hard, good against the run, good against the pass, accountable, spoke up about the fact that the Titans were playing good defense at times that didn't matter and bad defense in times that did. And this all just keeps pointing. And this matches up with what I found when I did my digging yesterday. I talked to people that are affiliated with the Rams organization, that knows what's going on there, that know coaches there, that know the front office. I've talked to folks that were in the locker room with Ernest Jones, players that everything that I heard from them was that this is a great player, great person, great leader, and that the stuff with the Rams, I haven't been able to get the exact what went on, but the closest I've found is that organizationally, they just don't want to pay middle linebackers. They don't want to pay that position, second contract, top of the market kind of money, which I don't think is a bad philosophy to have. But once they kind of made that designation, then Ernest Jones was going to be, as Paul said, a lame duck. And so I think it probably became acrimonious, and they chose to not have that kind of dynamic in the locker room. It's a very young defense in general, and having that kind of dynamic might not be the best thing. So they kind of exorcised him from the locker room and didn't get much in return. There are Rams fans furious about Les Snead and his inability to get good value in trades. They're bemoaning the Jalen Ramsey trade to the Dolphins and what he was not able to get in return there, the trade of Ernest Jones, they were not able to get there. So you get a little bonus for this, which is you get one of your division rivals to be unhappy, more unhappy than they already are, which has been a tough Rams season. And now potentially they're going to be facing Ernest Jones twice a year. I still am under the assumption the Seahawks will sign Ernest Jones and that he's going to be a Seahawk for the next 3 or 4 years. And so the Rams are going to get a whole lot of him. And if you didn't hear me talk about this before, well before the season started, well before Jones was traded, I had him as the second best linebacker in the NFC West behind only Fred Warner. And I don't think that was a hot take. You kind of look around the NFC West, you go to Arizona, it's not a great list of linebackers. San Francisco, outside of Fred Warner, not a great list. Dre Greenlaw, if he's healthy, would be in that conversation, but he's not, and has not been. I personally, I think I'd still take Ernest Jones because I think Ernest Jones gives you a little bit more variety. But Dre Greenlaw, he's definitely in the conversation. And then in Seattle, Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker, I still would put Ernest Jones above either of those guys. And so, you're getting a guy that you heard from Griff is Pro Bowl caliber. I think that's right. I don't think he is. Don't twist this into he's the Roquan Smith or he's Fred Warner. He's not those guys. But he is a very heady, physical player who really is good at getting off blocks. He is good at tracking the ball. He is good at physically like taking on blockers and stopping rushers in the hole. I was actually looking at this yesterday and I'll pull it up now, but if I was trying to see who had the most run stops so far this year. And I think, well, this is last year. Let's look at last year. That's when his full season, and it was his best season last year for sure. That was the first season without Bobby Wagner, last season with Aaron Donald. And where was he on that list? So he was 19th on that list. He was right around Pat. He had 51 run stops. And that was right where Patrick Queen was last year, interestingly. But I think I'm looking at the wrong number because there was a run stop rate that was over at NFL.com. And that was interesting for defense. So let me see if I can pull this up. Run stop rates. Give me 1 second, folks. This is, if I don't find it in a second, you'll have to trust me on it. But this was, oh yeah, there we go. So if we look back at last year, at least by NFL.com levels, Ernest Jones was a top 10 player in terms of stops in the NFL. He was right around like Zaire Franklin, Levante David, that level. I think that's a reasonable kind of comp of what kind of player he can be. And for what it's worth, he was above Roquan Smith in stops last year. He had 78. Roquan Smith had 74. Frankie Louvu, who was a big free agent for the Commanders, he was down there with Roquan Smith. Bobby Okereke also is a big player for the Giants. Terrell Bernard for the Bills, who we'll see this weekend. Demario Davis, he was ahead of all those guys. So I think you're getting one of the best middle linebackers in football for a 4th round pick and for a player that you don't want on your team anymore. I think Jerome Baker, that doesn't even really matter, that he's part of the deal. And you get a chance to have Tyrell Dodson move into position where he's potentially going to be his best. Tyrell Dodson has really made it clear he wants to learn and he's looking for leadership as well. He's now got a guy who's been in the Super Bowl who can talk. I think, am I right that is Ernest Jones the only guy on that Seahawks defense that's been in a Super Bowl? Is he the only guy? I got to look through the roster real quick. Is there anybody on this roster that's been in a Super Bowl at all other than Ernest Jones. I mean, I can't do the look for everybody right away, but did Jonathan Hankins ever play in a Super Bowl? Maybe with the Giants. And then actually no, because he said he hasn't gotten one yet. I'm looking through this. I don't know if any of these guys, I don't think Jaron Reed has, Gino has not. Maybe Laken Tomlinson with the 49ers. Maybe. I don't think Connor Williams has. So yeah, I think Ernest Jones may be the only guy on the roster that's actually played in a Super Bowl. And I think that matters. I think people care about that stuff and they listen. So it's good to add a guy that you want people listening to. It's good to add a guy that plays hard, that plays physically, that sets a tone. I think this could be the force multiplier that Griff talked about, and I think that that's an awesome thing to kind of consider. Hopefully, get a chance to meet him today. I think he's on his way to Seattle, might be there at the press conference, so I will try to talk to him, get some questions asked, get to know him a little bit better. Got a super chat here from Hawks fan Matt Man says, when do you think could be the earliest point at which the Seahawks try to extend Jones? I mean, here's the thing. Like, there's been a lot of criticism of the Seahawks and John Schneider acquiring players like Leonard Williams or Jamal Adams without then extending them as part of the deal. And you could say the same thing here with Ernest Jones. They've left the door open by not extending him. I think that it's possible they could extend him during this season. It's also possible that Ernest Jones does not want to be extended during the season. He may want to hit the market if he's playing well. That's going to be up to him and his representation. So it takes two sides for that to work out. But give it a couple of games. And if things look like I think they might start to look with him in the middle, I think the Seahawks will look to sign him before the season ends. David Schmader says, I think Jaron Reed got one in Kansas City. You might be right. Not positive, but that might be possible. And then Saban Sent Studio says the voicemail song was lit, fam. Yes, it was. It's fantastic. I'm super proud of it. You're going to be hearing it plenty. If you want to send a voicemail, record a voice memo on your phone, attach it to an email, send it to me at brian@hawkblogger.com. And you too could be the reason that song gets played on this show. All right, everybody, I'm going to leave you there. It's been great talking to you this morning, a little bit of an earlier edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I'll be talking to Geno Smith, to hopefully Ernest Jones. I think Tyrell Dodson, I'm pretty sure, is going to be speaking today. And then we've got some locker room time, so we'll see who I can talk to in there. And then we get to talk to Ryan Grubb and Adden Dirty in this afternoon, and we get to find out again with injuries who stayed and who did not. I think the Seahawks had generally a good injury report yesterday. Amazing that Kenneth Walker is still feeling ill and recovering. I think they're just being cautious with him. Nothing to worry about there. And I think the one to kind of watch will be Reek Woolen, and does he continue to stay on the field during the week? That's a big one. All right, everybody. Thank you. If you haven't given the show a like and click subscribe, please do. I really appreciate it. It helps us grow the channel. Join as a YouTube member. Join as a Patreon member, patreon.com/hawkblogger. They're all great, and it's a great way to support the show and bring people together. All right, folks. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram @hawkblogger. This has been episode 214 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care, y'all.